I was clearly thinking along the same lines as Zeke as I prepared this sermon for you, and used the same resource, in fact. I was going to give a heads up that if you don't want to hear about contemporary things, you might want to take a 2-minute break. But y'all seem like you've got strong constitutions. The work of the Days of Awe is based on the assumption that every one of us is capable of tshuva, of reflecting on when and how we have behaved badly, or do so habitually, and of making amends and changing our behavior. One of my favorite midrashim tells of how the world could not be created until tshuva was there in its very foundations. I fundamentally believe that we are all capable of changing our ways. And yet, it has to start with humility and a desire to align ourselves with goodness, with life. In the year between last Yom Kippur and this, we have seen so many instances of people who could potentially benefit from this sort of reflecting. People who are showing up at immigrants' workplaces and courtroom hearings, disguised in masks, arresting, detaining, separating them from their families, holding them in detention centers, and deporting them without regard for legal due process. People are using power to misusing power to shut down critique, to undermine scientific data about the health of humans and the health of the planet. People who are defunding healthcare and food aid for people in need. The list goes on. I'm concerned about the imminent end of liberal democracy in America and in Israel, but I'm talking about America today, being replaced rapidly by a totalitarian regime of cruelty and chaos. I know that many of you, clearly many of you, share my concerns as our government is shutting down from a lack of will to get through and continue our services. What I'm talking about includes both the institutions of democracy, like independent media and a trusted judiciary and a free press, and the values of democracy, including a universal commitment to human rights and civil rights. The rule of law, freedom of inquiry, access to vibrant places of higher education, who are, by the way, funding research, and strong democratic norms and institutions have allowed American Jewry to thrive. While it may appear that Jews are not being targeted today, let's not be fooled by anti-democratic action taken in the name of fighting anti-Semitism. Jews are being used and manipulated. The recent spate of immigrant arrests and withholding of federal funding from universities are evidence of a strategy employed by the Trump administration and developed by the Heritage Foundation, a strategy called Project Esther. This Project Esther uses claims of fighting anti-Semitism to dismantle the values we hold dear as Jews and as Americans, including the right to express dissent and the imperative to protect the stranger. History has taught us that whenever a government restricts the rights of a given group, oppression of Jews will soon follow. We have learned that our safety and freedom as Jews is irrevocably bound with the safety and freedom of all people. So I'm getting that you're on board with this, and now I'll put my rabbi hat, fully on and talk about how our tradition supports this. The call of Yom Kippur is to mend our ways, not try to make others change theirs. So what I'd like to lift up is how can the Jewish tradition support us in setting limits and stopping the rapid erosion of human rights and free speech in America? How can this day of reflection and renewed commitment help us weave together a community that, no matter what, prioritizes loving kindness, safety, and dignity for all people and for all life? In the words of the Torah that we're about to read, Re'e natati lefanecha hayom et hachayim ve'et hatov ve'et hamavet ve'et hara. See, I set before you this day life and goodness, death and evil or wickedness. And I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life if you and your offspring would live. Uvacharta b'chayim. Wickedness is equated with death in our Torah. I'll start with some wisdom from the Torah and a couple of Jewish philosophers, and then offer some practical advice from a modern historian who Zeke introduced this group to. For starters, this temptation toward wickedness goes back to our origin stories. When Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, childhood innocence ended. Humans were now in a world of consequences, and even more importantly, a world of self-consciousness, having to take responsibility for our actions. We have access to knowledge of good and evil, to a conscience. The Yom Kippur Haftorah, it's on page 4 in the back, Isaiah 58, screams. I mean, it's in print, but it's clearly screaming at those going through righteous motions of piety without care for their neighbors. No, Isaiah says on behalf of God, this is the fast I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness, rasha, and untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. It is to share your bread with the hungry and to take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, clothe him. The prophets of the Hebrew Bible would not have cried out against cruel injustice if it weren't already rampant in their day. Medieval philosopher Maimonides understood both God and God's created world as essentially good. He understood evil as the privation or absence of God. Evil in comparison with good is like darkness in comparison with light. It is not the contrast between one being and another, but being a being and its absence. In Maimonides' worldview, human evil is the consequence of stupidity, ignorance, blindness, irrationality, all related to the lack of knowing God. Human evil stems from distortion of our subjective lens. Unlike God, we can never see the full picture, so in this model, because evil does not exist as an independent force or power, but as the absence of God, humans have the obligation to learn about the way of the world and thereby choose good. And of course, the current explosion of Musar learning and practice gives us very practical vocabulary and tools for this learning. One of which is to not judge others for their lack of learning. 20th century journalist and philosopher Hannah Arendt's observations are similar in a way to Maimonides, but firsthand reporting on the Eichmann trial in 1961. After living through the Holocaust, arguably the most radical evil in human history, and hearing the testimony of one of its most horrific perpetrators, she came away with the understanding of evil as banal. Not trivial, she said. She spent the rest of her life clarifying. What she meant by describing evil as banal is that it's not deep. In her words, it is indeed my opinion now that evil is never radical, that it is only extreme, and that it possesses neither depth nor any demonic dimension. It can overgrow and lay waste the whole world precisely because it spreads like a fungus on the surface. I picture the weeds, where you have this huge weed and then you pull it and it's just got a little tiny stem. It is thought-defying, as I said, because the thought tries to reach some depth, go to the roots, and the moment it concerns itself with evil, it is frustrated because there is nothing. That is its banality. Only the good has depth and can be radical. Precisely because these criminals were not driven by the evil and murderous motives we're familiar with, they murdered not to murder, but simply as part of their career. It seemed only too obvious to us all that we needed to demonize the catastrophe in order to find some historical meaning in it. And I admit it's easier to bear the thought that the victim is the victim of the devil in human disguise, or the prosecutor in the Eichmann trial put it, of a historical principle stretching from Pharaoh to Haman. The victim of a metaphysical principle rather than the victim of some average man on the street who's not even crazy or particularly evil. This is chilling. The worst human evil is perpetrated when people are being shallow, unwilling, or unable to connect with the depth of our interbeing, or with deeper thoughts that help them find what makes sense. Timothy Snyder is a Yale history professor whose expertise is on European experiences of fascism, Nazism, and communism in the 20th century. His book, it's this big. If you don't have it, it'll take you, an hour and a half to read the whole thing. This little book on tyranny offers 20 lessons from the 20th century that we can apply today. I want to offer a handful of them grouped and filtered through my Jewish lens, and I'm not repeating the support institutions, but so glad that got named. Please look with me for a moment at pages 55, 6, and 7 in our Machzor. These are our communal confessions. And as you're looking, I invite you to notice which statements involve how we use our words. Which involve our affect, the attitude with which we show up. How many speak to kavod, the dignity of another? Which are sins of omission? Which are commission? This is our community's moral code. It's a recognition of our human proclivity to get off track. The communal confession helps us remind ourselves of the track we're aiming for. Not hurting people with our words, not denigrating another through gossip. In a way, it's an expansion of Rabbi Hillel's famous dictum, "What is hateful to you, do not do unto others." Notice that these are not prescribing how we should speak or what we should say. We're not trying to control others, but they're not trying to control us, these dictums, but rather build fences of protection so that people don't get hurt. If we truly believe, according to our liturgy, we will be addressing several of Timothy Snyder's suggestions for combating tyranny. Number 4, he has, take responsibility for the face of the world. The symbols of today enable the reality of tomorrow. Do not look away and do not get used to them. Snyder is talking about the gradual path to dehumanization, the way ordinary Germans and Austrians helped identify and label the Jewish families so that later it would be easier to target them. Let's not get used to racial profiling, to mixed messages about vaccines, to armed guards in our streets. Snyder says you might be one day offered the opportunity to display symbols of loyalty. Make sure that such symbols include your fellow citizens rather than exclude them. His 12th point, make eye contact and small talk. I've wanted to do a sermon about that for years. This is not just polite. It's part of being a citizen and a responsible member of society. It is also a way to stay in touch with your surroundings, break down social barriers, and understand whom you should and should not trust. Our communal confessions obligate us to see, acknowledge, and support the humanity and dignity of those around us. I don't imagine that the rabbis who assembled those confessions could have foreseen a world in which everyone's attention is immersed in devices, maybe with the podcast, maybe even with somebody who's not present in the physical space, so that we don't even hear or see those around us. Let's pick up our heads, bring our attention to where we actually are in the physical world and give attention to the people and the natural world. When we're out walking with attention in our devices, and I'm definitely counting myself in this, let's not deceive ourselves about its implications. We are participating in the erosion of community. The next lesson from Snyder goes hand in hand with the previous one. 13 is practice corporeal politics. Power wants your body softening in your chair and your emotions dissipating on the screen. Get outside. Put your body in unfamiliar places with unfamiliar people. Make new friends and march with them. You, B'nai Havurah, are doing this with the 3 working groups that came out of the 200 conversations. Kol hakavod. We'd go. Language matters. Language includes words, symbols, and affect. A little while ago, we chanted Baruch She'amar V'haya Ha'olam. Blessed is the one who spoke the world into being. This beautiful chant evokes the first creation story, the very opening of the Torah. The first act of creation was words. God said, God spoke, and creation was manifest. Number 9, Snyder says, be kind to our language. Avoid pronouncing the phrases that everyone else does. Think up your own way of speaking, if only to convey that thing you think everyone is saying. Politicians in our times feed their cliches to television, where even those who wish to disagree repeat them. The effort to define the shape and significance of events requires words and concepts that elude us when we are entranced by visual stimuli. Hannah Arendt affirms, we resist evil by not being swept away by the surface of things, by stopping ourselves and beginning to think. She adds, the more superficial someone is, the more likely they will be to yield to evil. An indication of such superficiality is the use of cliches, and Eichmann, God knows, was a perfect example. Each time he was tempted to think for himself, he said, who am I to judge if all around me, that is, the atmosphere in which we unthinkingly live, think it is right to murder innocent people? Snyder calls on us to stand out, be willing to say what no one else is, to investigate and learn, to dig deep, to believe in truth. We Jews are a culture of learners and debaters. We have these skills. While there is most clearly a need for direct confrontation, we also don't want to absorb or contribute to the energy, the vocabulary, the frameworks, and lies that feed tyranny. Judaism generally, Yom Kippur specifically, offers us alternative ways of thinking and being so that our words and our affect can be kind, creative, playful, and innovative, so that we can debate and argue substantively for solutions and stay in relationships. Each of our sources points in a direction that supports a balancing and healing response. Adam and Eve brought us conscious awareness when they ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Let's not hide what we know or bury it in busyness. Today's Torah reading reminds every one of us, this is not beyond you. Choose life, uvacharta b'chaim, which is goodness and love, not death and wickedness, mavet v'ra. Isaiah reminds us to tend to the suffering of others now. Maimonides taught that we should each consider ourselves, as well as the world, half meritorious and half culpable all year long. And we should believe that if we were just to commit one sin, we would incline ourselves and the whole world toward guilt and bring about destruction. And on the other hand, if we were to fulfill just one mitzvah, we would incline ourselves and the entire world toward merit and bring about salvation and redemption. Every choice, every action can have impact. Yom Kippur is the time to reflect on what we are mindlessly doing or colluding with. What are you willing to see and respond to that you weren't last year? What are you willing to speak out about? What are you willing to put your time and other resources into? As we progress through this season, may we be mindful of all the little choices that make the whole world tilt toward merit. As we are called by God, let's choose life. Shana Tova. Thank you.